So I am super excited to chat with today's guest. We have Deborah Maragopoulos, and she will be talking about the hypothalamus, which we haven't discussed on this podcast. So very excited to chat with Deborah about this. So let me go ahead and dive into her bio first. So Deborah Maragopoulos is an intuitive integrative family nurse practitioner who has spent over 30 years blending the science of medicine with the art of healing to help thousands of people heal from a variety of symptoms and thrive by treating their hypothalamus. Specializing in neuroimmune endocrinology, Deborah focuses on optimizing the function of the hypothalamus, the maestro of the symphony of hormones. She is the author of several books, including her latest, The Hypothalamus Handbook, which outlines the steps people can take to start healing the hypothalamus on their own. Known as the hormone queen, she's made it her mission to help everyone balance their hormones and live optimally no matter their age. And thank you so much for joining us, Deborah.
Thank you for having me, Eric. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, yeah. I'm excited to have this conversation. And so I'm sure when you're a guest on most podcasts, that one of the main questions they ask is, how did you get involved in just focusing on the hypothalamus? Because again, you're one of the few, if maybe the only one I've come across who really focuses on the hypothalamus. So if you could give a little bit more of your background.
That's a really good question. So when I was very young, 23-year-old nurse out of school, I gave birth to an intersex child. I was going to go into pediatrics and decided to veer into the study of hormones so I could help my child navigate the medical system. And that led me to develop an expertise in hormones and receptor sites and how lifestyle actually affected hormonal milieu, and not just sex hormones, but adrenals and thyroid and growth hormone, the whole works. And then I went into family practice after I got out of my graduate degree. And then I started doing a little bit of women's practice. I was in OB-GYN for a while, and there I got, deluged with all kinds of, hormonal concerns. So then I went into my integrative practice, and I basically wanted to learn way more about hormones than just sex hormones. And so I, set it out to the universe, like, let me learn about the neuroimmune endocrine system, because it's definitely connected. I just didn't know where it was connected or how. And so the universe sent me, we call them train wrecks in medicine, but they were the patients that had all kinds of diagnoses, the wandering hands, where, everything is wrong, neurological conditions, autoimmune conditions. They had all kinds of hormonal imbalances, adrenal, thyroid, you name it. They were tired. They were couldn't sleep. They were anxious and depressed, and on just a multitude of medications and supplements. So I was trying to get them all onto natural stuff. That's what they wanted. I want to switch over from conventional to natural treatments. And I was sending them out with bucket loads of supplements, and bioidentical hormones, et cetera. But I still wasn't treating the root of the issue. And that really bothered me. I really felt like I was just trading natural for conventional. So I really meditated about it and, tried to figure out, like, what's going on here. Just show me what's going on. I need some kind of clue. And I got a magazine in my office, Scientific America, and they were doing studies on fat white mice. And these fat white mice had the same symptoms of my patients. They were tired. They were also insomniac. They were overweight. They were depressed. They were anxious. They had adrenal and thyroid issues. They had sex hormone issues. And they sacrificed the mice. And they found that one hormone in their hypothalamus, pro-opiomelanocortin, was dysfunctional. It wasn't functioning properly. And that one master hormone out of many hormones the hypothalamus makes controls your thyroid, your adrenals, glucose metabolism, day-night cycles, and also makes you feel happy. So I thought, oh my gosh, it's the hypothalamus. So that's where I started my research. That was back in 1998. And really started researching the hypothalamus and how I could treat it, and what I needed to do lifestyle wise as well as supplement wise to treat the hypothalamus, and developed a very successful product, a supplement to actually help the hypothalamus balance. And here we are, 20 something years later, 25 years later, and it's working very well. So that's how I got started.
All right, wonderful. Yeah, we'll definitely talk about the supplement that you created a little later. What since the hypothalamus is so important, why is it ignored by most practitioners? And again, I'm guilty of this too. I can't say that I talk about the hypothalamus to most of my patients.
Well, the main reason we ignore it, I mean, we learned about it in school, right? We went in our anatomy and physiology and we learned about it. But because we can't measure the hormones that it produces, we can't get direct access to it without sacrificing the lab rat. Okay, we're not going to do that to humans. And the only time we really look at it is if we suspect a tumor, we might do an MRI and see if there's a tumor on the hypothalamus. We don't really pay attention to it. And so we have no way to measure it. So it really takes a bit of medical detective work to figure out that it's really the central controller that's at the root of the hormone issues, neurological issues or immune issues. And that's where I was kind of led to. So learning about pro-opiomelanocortin and all its effect on the lower endocrine glands and metabolism then led me to all the rest of the neurons in the hypothalamus and all the other hormones it produces. The hypothalamus is actually in the news now. It wasn't when I was first studying it. I couldn't find anything on it, but it's in the news now since COVID-19. The long COVID symptoms are hypothalamic dysfunction. And so there's been quite a bit of research on the hypothalamus, and then it has exploded. The anti-obesity drugs, almost all of them are related to upper control mechanisms of satiety and hunger and metabolism in the hypothalamus. That's what they target. So there's more and more research. It's been pretty incredible. I couldn't find anything 25 years ago. And when I was writing my book, I couldn't stop putting references in the bib until my publisher said, okay, let us have the book. You can have an active bib on your website. This is getting ridiculous. So there's a lot out there now researching the hypothalamus. Now, clinically applying that research is another factor. We don't all do that.
Yeah. And, I mean, to be fair, a lot of us do mention it. We were talking about before recording about, the HPT and HPA axis. And I mean, yeah, I talk about HPA axis, sometimes the HPT axis as well, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal and hypothalamic pituitary thyroid axis. So we mention it, but as you said, when testing, we can't look at those hormones. So like in the case of looking at the thyroid, you can measure the TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, which is the pituitary hormone, but you can't test any of the hypothalamus hormones. So yeah, I guess that's why it kind of goes ignored, but it doesn't mean that it's not important to pay attention to as well.
Well, I think it's the most important organ, honestly. It controls the majority of our vital systems. I mean, there's not much it doesn't control. It controls all of your endocrine glands, including the pineal gland. People will say the pineal's, beyond the hypothalamus, but it's not. It's the hypothalamus that actually triggers pineal production through melanocyte stimulating hormone. So it controls your day-night cycle. It controls your thyroid, your adrenals, your pancreas function, as well as it's the intimate controller of your gut. It's not the gut-brain connection. It's the gut-hypothalamus connection. It's the hypothalamus talking directly to the gut via hormones as well as the autonomic nervous system. And the hypothalamus talks to your fat cells through the sympathetic nervous system. The hypothalamus controls your immune system by controlling prolactin production and controlling thymus activity, which actually activates your T cells. There's not much the hypothalamus doesn't do. Respiration, heart rate, blood pressure, temperature control, weight monitoring, your metabolism, including cellular metabolism and detoxification, everything. So it's an important organ, but it's a difficult one to get to really figure out what's going on. And I think that's the biggest issue. I like to think of the hypothalamus as the operating systems of our human computer. And then the hormones that we give patients and neurotransmitters that we influence, immune factors we influence, those are all software programs. So the hard drive's the physical body, but the operating systems is your hypothalamus. So that helps, I think, my patients also get an idea that, well, that's really important. I can't just keep uploading new software programs if my operating systems isn't functioning properly.
That was a great explanation. Thank you for that. Can you talk a little bit more about like hypothalamic dysfunction? Like how common is it? Maybe some signs or symptoms or any ways, since you can't test for it on a lab, is there ways that you can recognize it?
Absolutely. So hypothalamic dysfunction is basically when the hypothalamus in one or more of its functions is not functioning properly. It's usually caused by some kind of hypothalamic microinflammation, and that can be induced by a head injury. Okay, that's a very common induction, but it can also be induced by nutritional issues. Overnutrition definitely induces it. We know high-fat diets and high-sugar diets induce it. Undernutrition or malnutrition induces it. Toxins, like heavy metals and BPA, endocrine disruptors. And then you have your viruses and bacterium. We know Epstein-Barr virus, COVID-19, they definitely affect the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus is affected so easily by all of these different things because it is not protected by the blood-brain barrier. So it's exposed to everything your body's exposed to, unlike your brain, which is protected. So the symptoms are fatigue, difficulty gaining weight or losing weight, even though your hunger may be the same, your appetite's the same. You're going to have different hormonal issues, infertility. You may have impotency, low libido. You may have irregular menstrual cycles in a woman. You may have premature menopause or what we call hypogonadism in a male, where they don't make enough testosterone and they're younger. You can have thyroid disorders, both hypo and hyperthyroidism, as well as thyroiditis, autoimmune conditions, adrenal disorders, too much cortisol, too little cortisol, or dyscircadian cortisol. Hyperprolactinemia is definitely a sign of hypothalamic dysfunction because the hypothalamus produces prolactin. Insomnia, depression, anxiety, memory issues, learning disabilities, dementia, temperature control regulation. You're cold all the time, hot all the time. Hot flashes is a clear sign of hypothalamic dysfunction. So there's not much it doesn't control. It controls your blood pressure, your heart rate, your respiration. So most of the metabolic conditions are centered on hypothalamic dysfunction. So we're talking about like high cholesterol with high blood pressure and also glucose intolerance, insulin resistance. That's hypothalamic centered.
And so you mentioned a lot of things can affect the hypothalamus. You mentioned nutrients, overnutrition, undernutrition, infections, certain viruses, for example, environmental toxins. Can you talk a little bit more about stress? I know you mentioned cortisol before, but again, we don't think about stress, or at least I really haven't thought about stress affecting directly the hypothalamus. Again, I always think about that HPA axis, and honestly, again, thinking more of the pituitary and the thyroid more so than the hypothalamus. So if you could talk a little bit about stress's impact on the hypothalamus, that'd be wonderful.
So basically, when you're under stress, and that doesn't really matter if the stress is something that's threatening your life, like a tiger's chasing you, or your bills are late, or people are bugging you at work, or you're having marital issues, it's all, your body responds the same way. You get a fight or flight response, which is induced in the hypothalamus, tells the pituitary gland to produce ACTH, which tells the adrenal glands to produce cortisol. The hypothalamus is triggered by the sympathetic nervous system and sends that trigger back down to tell the adrenals to produce the adrenaline. So there's this nervous system as well as hormonal effect in the hypothalamus that triggers that stress response. So an acute stressor, like I'm running away from danger, is not really going to damage my hypothalamus. But if I have to keep running, if I have to keep escaping the danger, if that stressor is constantly after me, and like I said, it doesn't have to be a tiger. I could have financial concerns, relationship concerns. Eventually, the hypothalamic pituitary axis is affected. And we find in people with high levels of stress, chronic stress, PTSD, chronic depression or anxiety, which stresses the HPA axis, their hypothalamus actually is anatomically different than the normal hypothalamus. So it's constantly being revved, and it affects not only the adrenal glands, but that pro-opiomelanocortin I was telling you about, that big mother hormone of the hypothalamus, that is where you get cortical releasing factor. That is the hypothalamic hormone that tells the pituitary to produce adenocorticotrophic hormone, or ACTH. So that POMC also controls your thyroid, melanocyte stimulating hormone, which controls your metabolism and day-night cycles, and it controls your glucose function, and it's the leftover becomes beta endorphins. So it controls a lot of different things. So if your glucose is out of balance, you have insulin resistance, you have low thyroid function, you have adrenal issues, you're having trouble sleeping, it's higher than just adrenals, thyroid, and pancreas. It's way higher than that. It's up in the hypothalamus. That's pro-opiomelanocortin out of balance. And that's just one of many hormones that the hypothalamus makes. So stress affects it greatly. And we can control our response to stress, which will actually relieve some of the inflammation in the hypothalamus. We can actually change the way we respond to stress through mindfulness, deep breathing exercises, etc., counseling, therapy, whatever you need to kind of calm down, actually will help to heal your hypothalamus.
So important for blood sugar, for if you're having sleep issues. Again, not all sleep issues necessarily are related to the hypothalamus, but hypothalamic dysfunction can be a factor, and it's not just directly related to adrenals in many cases. And then, so we know the relationship between thyroid and, again, that HPT axis. And if you want to go a little bit deeper into that, that'd be great. But then
Sure.
also in addition to that, the immune system too, because you mentioned like how the hypothalamus is important when it comes to the thymus gland, which is important when it comes to immunity. So feel free to go anywhere you'd like, as far as not just its importance with thyroid gland health directly, but then also the impact it has on thyroid autoimmunity for those with Graves and Hashimoto's.
So one of the things that I see a lot in my patients is symptoms of hypothyroidism or hyperthyroidism. And they're either have too much thyroid hormone going on or too little, but it's really not showing in the blood yet. And they're not actually, their TSH isn't affected. So their TSH isn't too high in hypothyroidism or too low in hyperthyroidism yet. And their T4 and T3 levels look fine too, but they're already symptomatic. And that is usually what's called central thyroid disorder, meaning it's at the hypothalamic level that the hypothalamus is becoming somewhat resistant to the thyroid hormone itself. So it's not giving that good feedback from the hypothalamus to the pituitary to the thyroid to keep your thyroid hormone in balance. So you feel the symptoms. And I'll see that a lot, especially in hypothyroid patients who are very symptomatic. They're cold all the time. They're constipated. They're gaining weight. They think it's their thyroid, but their TSH is within normal limits, and free T4 and free T3 are within normal limits. But if I look at their TSH compared to their T4 and T3, they're not talking together properly. Because if your T4 and T3 are at the low end of normal, your TSH should be at the high end of normal. It's a seesaw. It's a negative feedback system. And so oftentimes they're both low. The TSH is low end of normal and T4 and T3 are at the low end of normal. And they're showing hypothyroid signs, or hyperthyroid, both are on the high end of normal. They're not bottomed out yet with hyperthyroidism. So it's not communicating, it's a miscommunication. So that's the central aspect of thyroid disorders, which happens with the adrenals, it happens with gonads, but that's that piece of miscommunication that we can see pretty easily with the thyroid, where we can't see it as easily with the gonads and with the adrenal glands. So that's a good clue that something else is going on. And so, those patients need help. Do they need thyroid hormone treatment right away? Oftentimes not. If you treat their hypothalamus, that'll trigger a proper communication, and their thyroid gland can continue to produce thyroid hormone. So the problem is if their immune system's off and they have either Graves or Hashimoto's, and they're attacking their own ability to produce proper amounts of thyroid hormone, then that is often underlined in the hypothalamus, because the hypothalamus controls the hormones that control your immune system's function. So again, if I focus on the hypothalamus, I oftentimes don't have to do aggressive treatment for Hashimoto's and Graves' disease, because I'm working with the root issue first. And that doesn't mean we're not trying to treat some of those symptoms. If they've got, Graves' disease and their heart's palpitating out of their chest, we need to calm that down. But until that hypothalamus is functioning properly, we'll always be suppressing their thyroid production in Graves' disease, or we'll always be giving them thyroid replacement therapy and hypothyroidism with Hashimoto's, because we haven't addressed the hypothalamus.
So having essential thyroid disorder, you said that would appear as having a normal TSH, and then the thyroid hormones, depending on whether someone has more hyper or hypo, like if it's central hypothyroidism, would be TSH normal, and then the thyroid hormones maybe within range, but on the lower side.
Yeah. So what we'd expect to see is if the thyroid hormone, the T4 and the T3 are low, on the low end of normal, and they're feeling hypothyroid, I'd expect the TSH to be elevated, right? It's a seesaw. So if that's not happening, if I see the TSH is low and the T4 and T3 is low, that's a miscommunication. That's central hypothyroidism. And the same on the other end for hyperthyroidism. You see it more with hypothyroidism. So, and it's not really looked at. It's not really treated at all. It's not paid attention to, and the patients will continue to complain until they finally can't make any more thyroid hormone on their own because there's no more stimulus to the thyroid trying to get them to make more thyroid hormone. They've become resistant to that communication network. Just like you become insulin resistant, you can become resistant to any of your hormones. Those receptor sites get overwhelmed.
Yeah, there's a condition which maybe ties into this thyroid hormone resistance, kind of like insulin resistance.
Mhm.
But with that, it's usually like the pattern is actually TSH might be normal, but also might be elevated. But the thyroid
Mhm.
hormone levels usually are on the higher side too, kind of like insulin resistance. You have too much
Mhm.
insulin; it's just not getting into the cell. So, and there's not a lot out there on thyroid hormone resistance. So it also makes me wonder if the hypothalamus might also play a role in that as well.
Well, you've got the cellular resistance at the peripheral cells in the body, but you can also get that same resistance in the hypothalamus to the hormones that it's supposed to be responding to. So we see that with insulin resistance in the hypothalamus, central insulin resistance and glucagon resistance. That's how those GLP-1 anti-obesity drugs work. That's where obesity begins, is that miscommunication in metabolism, weight, hunger, and satiety. It's in the hypothalamus. So it's the same thing can happen with the thyroid. We know it happens with, diabetes, and we suspect it also happens with the adrenal glands. I'm sure it happens. I see it all the time with my patients who are making all kinds of dyscircadian cortisol levels. They feel low, but their levels are normal, or they look high, but their levels are normal. They're just not, their ACTH isn't matching up to their cortisol levels. And it's probably related to the cortical releasing factor in the hypothalamus, but we can't measure that. So we have to, go up a little bit higher. It's kind of
And
upstream medicine rather than downstream. Most of the time we're taught in medicine and even in natural medicine to, treat the symptoms, and we have different drugs for different symptoms, and we try to get to the core of that symptom, but we're not going all the way upstream to see where this is occurring. And so treating the hypothalamus, focusing on the hypothalamus, is more upstream medicine.
Okay, no, that makes sense. And then fertility as well. So it could benefit people with thyroid conditions. Again, the adrenals all tied into the hypothalamus as well as the pituitary. And then if someone's having fertility issues, they're dealing with infertility, I imagine also folk giving some support to the hypothalamus can also be beneficial.
Oh, absolutely. So since I developed my supplement, I do very little infertility work, where that was one of my specialties, leaving the women's practice, going into my own integrative practice. So I did a lot of infertility work with couples at that time. And then once I developed the supplement, and that was my feeling, is like their hypothalamus isn't allowing them to get pregnant because it's off. It's not balanced. It's not functioning optimally. So once we got it functioning optimally, they would naturally start menstruating, correctly, and ovulating, and they were no longer resistant to their partner's sperm. And so we weren't having the antibody reactions anymore. So it was, it made a huge difference. And I have customers now who just utilize Genesis Gold every time they want to get pregnant. So it helps to feed the hypothalamus, to give it what it needs. And I think most of us just aren't as clean as our diets might be, and as hard as we try to get, organic and plant-based and a variety of foods, we may not be getting all the nutrition that our genetics needs in order to function optimally.
Yeah, I did look at the supplement and look at the label. It has a lot of things in there.
It
Just
does have
a
a lot
lot
of
of
things in there.
ingredients. Yeah, I don't know if
Yeah.
you want to talk about some of these things. I saw amino acids, probiotics, I believe. Herbs in there. Just again, a lot of at least it seemed like a few dozen different ingredients. And
It's
and
got
I,
a
I
lot
didn't
of
notice.
ingredients.
Is it capsule or is it powder? Since it has a lot
It's
in there, I'm
it's in a powder. It's in a powder form
okay.
that you mix in water and drink. So it's like a green drink. So the basis of Genesis Gold are the amino acids, and I actually have them packaged separately as well for people who have any plant-based allergies. If they have any allergies to the other ingredients in Genesis Gold, they can start with the Sacred 7 amino acids. And I say start with because most of the time, what looks like an allergy actually is a hypersensitivity, which gets resolved once the hypothalamus is in better functioning. So those amino acids are really the core of the hypothalamic support. And then everything else in Genesis Gold are all the other nutrients that now we have research that shows that PUFAs, and especially, from seaweeds and, sea vegetation, those are polyunsaturated fatty acids, amino acids, and also plant phenols and a variety of botanicals actually help to feed the hypothalamus. I had put all this into the recipe before the formula, before all this research came out. And it was basically what I was giving my patients in, lots and lots of jars of supplements, many, many capsules and pills that they were taking. But it was more of a synchronistic blend. So feeding them, what they needed in order to kind of giving the hypothalamus a buffet of nutrient options to work with. So after the amino acids, it's like this, the sea vegetation is probably the greater weight of these greens, which is why it's flavored, because eating seaweeds is not very, very flavorful. And then we also we use like fruit extracts to flavor it. And then we also have the botanicals and the herbal bases. And then there's digestive support and probiotics, to help with actually digesting all of this. So it's been very successful, and it's allowed a lot of my patients who've been taking, tons of different stuff to kind of simplify their regimen and get down to the root of the issue. So.
Yeah. And I imagine you combine it though with other things too. Like it's not, even if everybody takes the supplements, I assume you just also make sure they're eating a healthy diet and still trying to
Oh
block
yeah,
out
no,
time for risk
it's five.
management and
Yeah, it's 5 pillars for hypothalamic health. I mean, I don't have enough Genesis Gold for you to drink if you're not going to bed and turning off your lights, and you're sedentary and you're eating junk food and you're super stressed out, and your mindset is such that that you just believe that you're always going to be sick. You just have no faith in your own healing ability. So yeah, it's a lot of different things. And that's because the hypothalamus is really sensitive to that. The hypothalamus is super sensitive to your sleep regimen. So as soon as you start turning off the lights, getting into your jammies or taking your warm bath first, your hypothalamus starts triggering nocturnal hormones. But if you don't have a good sleep hygiene, and you're constantly going to bed at different times, and you're on these screens, and getting that blue light reflected back at the hypothalamus, which it thinks it's daytime instead of nighttime, it will actually suppress hypothalamic function for nocturnal mode and puts off all of your nocturnal hormones. And one of the big hormones that we don't pay a lot of attention to is prolactin. It's a nocturnal hormone. We produce it during the day, but at very low levels, that actually stimulates your thymus to start training and triggering those T cells to go after other and not you. So if they're not programmed properly, then you have autoimmunity. And I often see that patients who have autoimmune conditions will have high levels of prolactin during the day. They have dyscircadian prolactinemia. They're not hyperprolactin, so they're not way above normal, but they have nighttime levels during the day. And that's, your immune system isn't supposed to be functioning at high levels then. It's supposed to function at high levels at night to clean house and make sure you haven't been invaded, et cetera. And so we'll see a lot of autoimmune issues when their prolactin's high. And that's because not only does the hypothalamus produce prolactin, the pituitary gland actually releases it, but the hypothalamus produces it. You can measure prolactin in the blood. The hypothalamus produces dopamine, which is the opposite of prolactin. It's what turns prolactin off. So when the hypothalamus becomes dysfunctional and that prolactin production gets off, then you have dyscircadian prolactin production. You're making it in the daytime. What'll happen, what you will notice as a symptom, is those people that have high prolactin in the morning, they're the ones who have to have coffee. They can't get up. They're not morning people. It's almost like they're sleepwalking. And that's what prolactin does at night. It puts you into a really deep sleep, almost anesthetic sleep, so your immune system can clean up.
yeah. So do you test prolactin on everybody then, just to see if
Yeah,
it's
I
on the
do. I
higher
do it
side?
between 8 and 9 a.m. and make sure there's no nipple stimulus, either male or female or other genders, because any nipple stimulation will raise prolactin levels. So for 24 hours before, test it between 8 and 9 a.m. and a healthy level is under 9 by 9 a.m. in males and females. But, I'll get patients in their teens, their 20s, almost close to 30s in a woman, even though that's considered within normal limits. That's a nocturnal level. That's not a daytime level.
Okay. And so again, higher side is what you're usually like seeing with autoimmune conditions. You're not seeing it like crazy elevated, correct?
Yeah, I'm not suspecting a microadenoma of the pituitary, a hyperprolactinemia for that. I mean, but I have had patients with super high prolactin levels and it still wasn't a microadenoma. I'll give you an example of a man who came into me who he was overweight, he was super fatigued, he was kind of depressed. His wife wanted me to give him some testosterone, thinking that would be the issue. And he had trouble waking up in the morning. And so I tested him. He had low testosterone, he had low adrenal function, he had low thyroid function, but what he had ridiculously high was his prolactin. His prolactin was way higher than normal. I did an MRI. He did not have a microadenoma. But so what I did is I gave him a dopamine agonist to actually lower the prolactin, but just in the morning, as if he was producing dopamine, and I supported his hypothalamus. And within just 2 or 3 months, all those other hormone levels started to get into better balance just by bringing his prolactin level down. And I was able to wean him off of the dopamine agonist. So and that was the thing. I'm like, I can give you testosterone. I can give you adrenal, support. I can give you thyroid support. We could do all that, but prolactin blocks those receptor sites. So you're not going to hear those hormones in those cells. They're not going to function. And he noticed a difference within a week or so of taking the dopamine agonist. He could feel like he was waking up. So it takes about 2 months to reset it with the dopamine agonist for a dyscircadian hyperprolactinemia.
And what dopamine agonist do you recommend?
Nope. I usually use bromocriptine because it's short acting. I don't like the long acting ones. I'm not trying to suppress prolactin all the time. I don't want to suppress it at night. So I use bromocriptine, and I use it vaginally in a female and rectally in a male. That because bromocriptine taken orally can actually induce hypertension, can cause some nausea and vomiting and give you headaches. But taken through the mucous membranes, through the vagina or the rectum, it doesn't have any of those symptoms. Those studies were done on infertile women back in the 70s on other ways to use bromocriptine. So I've been using bromocriptine vaginally in women for 3 decades, 4 decades, a long time.
Have you heard anything about chasteberry, Vitex affecting prolactin in a positive way? I don't know if that could be used in a similar way.
Chasteberry has a progestational effect, and it does have mild inductions of lowering prolactin. So for very, very low levels, like slight dyscircadian, it can be helpful. But the problem is you have to use kind of high levels of chasteberry, which then affects sex steroid production. So that's, I haven't found it to be super successful in my patients. A lot of them have already been taking it, trying to get it down. And I just haven't found, because the levels they have to take to bring it down messes up the gonads production of sex steroids.
Okay. Very interesting.
It's not a specific dopamine agonist. It's a broad range.
Okay. Good to know. Good to know. Thank you. And then you might have not had this question yet. And maybe you have, but so there are adrenal glandulars, there's glandulars that support pituitary,
Thyroid,
and again,
ovaries, testes.
Yeah, but there are also hypothalamic glandulars out there. So I want to ask you about that, because I imagine for adrenal glandulars, you would say, well, maybe there's a time and place, but you want to address the cause of the problem and not just maybe rely on adrenal glandulars. But would it be the same with glandulars to support the hypothalamus?
So my opinion on glandulars has to do with a study that was done. It was quite a long time ago. I want to say 20 years ago, that looked at what happened to the glandulars after a certain period of time. So they actually did radioisotopes on these glandulars and had people taking them in the beginning of their treatment. So usually the first 6 to 12 weeks, the glandular targeted the cell. So if it was an adrenal glandular, you found it in the adrenals. Thyroid glandular, you found it in the thyroid. Pituitary, you found it in the pituitary. After that 6 to 12 week period, it started migrating into other parts of the body, and a lot of it, went to the liver to detox. So I see glandulars as short-term therapy, and I believe you need hypothalamic support for a much longer time. It takes at least 90 days to optimize hypothalamus function. And if you've been ill, let's say you've been out of balance with adrenal and thyroid disorders and autoimmunity for 10 years, you're going to add 10 months, 1 month per year you've been out of balance to that first 90 days in order to get optimal functioning. You wouldn't be able to take glandular that long and still affect the hypothalamus without causing toxicity. So I know there's a lot of supplement brands that's out there that, has been using glandulars. Again, my belief is it has its place, but it's very short term. We weren't and that's what we used in the beginning. If you were infertile, an infertile man, you would eat the testes of the buck to try to burst your fertility, or, we would feed that to you, but we wouldn't feed you. You wouldn't get it forever. It would usually be for a short period of time. And so I think that that's part of the issue, is overuse of it, and then it becoming more of a toxin than helpful anymore. So.
Okay. Well, thank you for that explanation.
You're welcome.
And Deborah, before we start wrapping things up, can you summarize the 5 pillars to achieve
Absolutely.
optimal hypothalamic function? Yeah.
So what I preach to my patients and my customers is 5 pillars to optimize hypothalamus health. Number 1 is getting adequate sleep in the dark. If you're an adult, 7 to 9 hours a night, turning off those, screens, those tablets, etc., before you go to bed is really important. So, you don't want to have lights in your room, and it needs to be nice and dark. So it's hard, though, when your hypothalamus is out of balance, because oftentimes you're not sleeping well to start with. But you do need that sleep hygiene, because it triggers the hypothalamus's nocturnal mode. And then you need to be eating well. Nutrition is super important. So high fat diets, high sugar diets cause hypothalamic inflammation. We know that. It actually induces metabolic conditions. So you need to really eat a plant-based diet. And the simple diet to follow is the Mediterranean diet. And I'm not talking pasta and pizza. I'm talking mostly, produce. Try to do organic, try to get locally grown, try to get a variety. And you are getting protein, but you're usually getting most of it from your eggs, a little bit of dairy, chicken and fish, seafood, and then just red meat is limited. You're not getting as much, a lot of sugars. It doesn't mean that you don't get any, but you do get a little bit, but not very much. The same with alcohol. It's way at the top of the pyramid. It's a little tiny bit of red wine. And then the same with, with pastas and grains and things like that. It's mostly whole grains, legumes. So it's very plant-based. Even with a great plant-based diet, I think you need a little more help, but that's a great place to start. And I think the biggest issue that a lot of my patients have is they don't know how to cook vegetables properly. So they've never found them to be tasty enough to include them in their diet on a regular basis. And mostly what they'll eat is salads. And raw vegetables are not as well digested, especially by us humans, because we don't make cellulase. We can't break down. We need cooking to break down the fiber part of vegetables. So learning how to cook your vegetables is a great way to improve your nutrition and making sure you're getting a good variety. My favorite way is roasting in olive oil. Olive oil actually has the most value in terms of preserving nutrition in the vegetables. Roasting at 350, no more than 400 degrees is a great way to actually retain nutrition. And there's very few vegetables that are roasted that aren't tasty. You can't roast greens, though. Greens need to be sauteed. And then we've got activity. So number 3 is activity. So being sedentary is the new smoking. If you're not moving around, you're not stimulating your hypothalamus to actually increase your metabolism, so you're not burning as much energy. You're going to get weaker. You're going to gain adipose tissue. You're going to become hormonally imbalanced. I think that's one of the biggest things that we're seeing with the feminization of the younger male, is because a lot of them are sitting. They're not doing as much activity as they used to do when jobs were more physical. A lot were on the computers, and we're just sitting too much, more than 8 hours a day. So we need to move around. You need to get up and move around. I'm a big believer in exercise, always have been. But if you're not a formal exerciser, just getting up 5 minutes every 30 minutes makes a big difference in insulin resistance and improving your metabolism. But try to get some aerobic exercise a few times a week. Stretching and also weight resistance is really helpful as well. So you've got those 3 pillars of activity and being as active as possible. They say that exercise is probably the best anti-aging thing you can do to improve your metabolism. So we've got sleep, we've got nutrition, we got activity. My 4th pillar is mindset. If you don't have a healing, healthy mindset, you get in your own way. If you don't believe you can heal, there's not enough bioidentical. I've got these great bioidentical hormones, supplements. You can do everything else, but if you don't believe it, it's not going to work. You've got to start shifting your mindset. You've got to start shifting your mindset towards towards healing and believing that you can heal and start looking for what's working instead of what's not working. That makes a huge difference, kind of embracing where you are in life. I deal a lot with menopausal women. I'm in that age group. And, this is not a curse. This is actually a blessing. And embracing the aspects of what's happening at this point in our life makes it for not just a more pleasant journey, but a healthier journey. And then the last piece is hypothalamic nutrition. And that's why I created Genesis Gold, is to provide all those PUFAs and those plant phenols and the amino acids necessary to actually help the hypothalamus do its job better. And so that it can function better and you can optimize its functioning, and you're able to, diminish a lot of the medications you're taking, a lot of hormones you're taking. You don't need those anymore if the hypothalamus is doing its job better.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing those 5 pillars. And is there anything else that, I mean, you covered so much. So but is there anything else I should have asked you that I didn't ask you, or any, last things that you want to talk about?
Well, I think the biggest thing is you need to give it time. The hypothalamus is not going to be fixed overnight. It's not like taking a sleeping pill and going to sleep. If we're going to reset your circadian rhythm, it's going to take time. If we're going to reset your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal or hypothalamic pituitary thyroid axis, it's going to take time. So that 90-day window is crucial. And I think that's the biggest issue I have with people that don't know about the hypothalamus. They want a quick result. So when you start changing your lifestyle and you start supporting it nutraceutically, you will feel more energy. You will sleep a little bit better. Your moods will be better fairly quickly, but it's not going to fix all your hormones and everything else rapidly. I mean, my infertile patients, it's 3 to 6 months from starting taking Genesis Gold to conception. It takes a while to kind of balance out that hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis. So it just takes some time. So you need to be patient. You didn't get here in this place of illness and out of balance overnight. It took time to get to this place. So yes, you need to change probably a lot of lifestyle factors, but you also need to give the nutraceutical time and what you're doing in your lifetime to see the effects. Just turning off your lights 2 or 3 nights in a row isn't going to reset your sleep pattern, and then pull an all-nighter on night 4. That's not going to help. You need to really commit to that shift and that change. And, 2 weeks minimum to set a habit. 40 days would be even better. Your hypothalamus needs time to heal.
One more question I have related to the Genesis Golds. When someone's healing, do they typically take more of that, and then, like, on a wellness basis, just take less than that? Like, how does that work, the dosing?
It's dosed by the body weight. So it's 4 grams per 50 pounds of body weight. And it has in it a scoop for the average 150-pound person, but it's really dosed by body weight. Yes, they will take at least their body weight, if not a little bit more, when they're really out of balance. Although sometimes that will induce a detox reaction. If you're pretty toxic, you can actually detox pretty quickly when the hypothalamus starts getting what it needs. And that's uncomfortable. You got headaches, you got tummy aches, you've got diarrhea, you're gassy, you maybe you even break out because toxins are coming out through your skin. And oftentimes is this a side effect? Well, no, you were toxic and we needed to detox you. So you might need to slow down that process. Okay. You might need, dietary detox, and you might need to, better hydration, and you might need some other things to actually help to slow down and maybe take a little bit less in the beginning, so it's not so drastic. So it does take a little bit of time. Once they get on maintenance, though, I mean, I take less than my body weight. I've been on it for a long time. If I get stressed, it's the first thing I up. So if stressors are really high, I just recently had to deal with the death of my dad and that whole hospice process. It was stressful. So I took extra and got up to my body weight, even added a little extra Sacred 7 on top of the Genesis Gold. That way I didn't have to mick around with my hormones or anything else. It's pretty much all I take, so that I could, stay in balance and be there for that process and for my family. So, life happens. So it's, it can get stressful. And at that time, your body needs a little bit more of those conditional amino acids, those conditional fatty acids, those things that, we would make if we could, but we can't always make enough when we're under stress.
All right. Well, where can people find out more about Genesis Gold? Where can they purchase it? And then also, if you could let them know where they could find your book. I'm thinking Amazon, but if you
Yeah.
could just, yeah.
Well, my website is genesisgold.com. You can find everything about me, about my book, about all the books I've written. You can purchase Genesis Gold from there. Of course, my book is also on Amazon, the Hypothalamus Handbook. But if you go to genesisgold.com, you'll be able to find everything that you need, including, I have hundreds of blog posts. I have a YouTube channel that'll connect you to if you prefer to watch videos and not read, and get educated that way. And then I have quite a few free programs, like my Hormone Reboot training, which is a free program to actually educate you and help you. It's kind of a video course, very short, but it helps you learn more about your hypothalamus and things that you can do to help yourself.
All right. Of course, I'll make sure to include all these links in the show notes. And again, thank you so much, Deborah. This was an amazing conversation. Again, the first one I had in this is definitely in this depth as far as the hypothalamus. Again, I'm sure the listeners learned a lot, and I did as well.
Thank you so much, Eric.